And we're back after a brief break. You're watching South Texas Now with attorney and nurse practitioner Joe Flores. We want to thank all our sponsors and all the support out there. Don't forget Don Humberto Lozano Lopez. He passed away in 2011, but he's honored, he's venerated, and he's never forgotten. Thank you, Lopez Broadcasting, for giving us our start. Thank you, KRS, and all their affiliates here and the surrounding area in South Texas. With me again is Judge Bobby Galvan, 94th District Court here in Nueces County. Welcome back, Judge.
Thank you.
Just to catch people up, if they're just starting to watch the program, we talked about the rich culture that you've had. In fact, going back at least 5 to 6 generations living here in South Texas. And then we talked about your career as a county attorney and public service, and then going on to the federal system. We talked about human trafficking, drugs, and, the federal system. Just touching on that a little bit, what is the difference between the federal and the state system here, Texas versus federal?
Well, here in Texas, primarily, the federal statutes that we prosecute here, when I was there at the U.S. Attorney's Office, were drug cases, large drug cases, gun cases, primarily felon in possession of a firearm cases, and alien transporting cases. There were some other alien cases like illegal reentry after deportation. But those were primarily what we did. Oh, and then also internet child porn.
Those are very hard cases. I have had, as a defense attorney, I generally turn down, and I don't turn away much business, but the child porn industry and all of that, it's very disturbing to me as a father, and I would hate to get it wrong, where, we've seen those movies like Ed Norton and what is his name? Oh, gosh. It was a movie where the Richard Gere and Ed Norton, where he was the lawyer, and he believed the guy had split personalities, and then he found out I represented the wrong split personality.
He killed like a priest or something?
A priest, yeah. So I always thought in my head, there are certain cases, and my wife said, those absolutely not,
Yeah, they're tough cases.
They're tough cases. Yeah, so I generally send them on to some specialists.
And it evolves, because what evolves is the technology. The technology and the way the images are stored and sent evolves constantly.
Well, I've had 17, 18-year-olds downloading, images of 15, 16-year-olds, and they're only 2-3 years apart. But I've seen some U.S. attorneys have to go after those cases.
Well, hey, look, here's the nightmare scenario. An 18-year-old has sex with a 16-year-old.
Senior and junior.
Consensual, which wouldn't be prosecuted necessarily in the state, because there's a defense because of the closest in age. You know that as a defense attorney.
Yes.
But now what this person's done is they've created child porn, and they distribute it to their friends, right?
Yes, sir.
So now they've manufactured and distributed child pornography.
Two-tapper.
And so, they're looking at some serious time, and that's the nightmare scenario. And I don't think that's necessarily what the statute originally intended, but there's people that get caught in the crossfire that way.
That and guns. Let's talk about that, because
guns?
Texans and the United States love guns, right? We have like 1.2 guns for every household, so it's like, or per every individual. We have more guns than people in the United States. I like my guns too, for hunting and for protecting my home. But, after mass shootings that happen. So let's talk about guns.
The gun side?
I'm sorry.
Most of the gun stuff that was prosecuted in federal court was felon in possession of a firearm. A lot of times, I had one case where it was in a small jurisdiction, and the authorities there felt this guy had shot his wife, and they felt pretty solid that he had murdered her, but they couldn't prove it. But he was a felon, and he had no business with a gun. He was cleaning it, and he claimed that it just went off. But he was a felon, so we prosecuted that.
And as a state judge, if somebody doesn't have a felony, and let's say their best friend gives them a gun, and neither one of them has a felony, and he's carrying the gun that his friend gave him. He said, here, it's COVID, take this C9 or this Desert Eagle for protection of your home. You're not a felon, are you? No. And then he gives him the gun. And
that's not a problem.
That's not a problem. Okay. And now
when we're talking Texas law, that's not a problem at all.
Now, federal, what I've seen,
things can get a little. Yeah, it can get. It depends. Is the firearm stolen? Is the serial number rubbed out, which would give you an idea that maybe it's a stolen firearm? I mean, you can get yourself in trouble. But if it's just a legal firearm and you transfer it, now there is a statute out there, federal statute, where if you transfer a firearm to a minor, you can possibly be prosecuted.
Under 18, under federal.
I think it's USC 18.
922.
I think it's X.
922. Yeah,
but it's 922, but I think that's X.
Okay.
And I think normally it's like N or H that's the felon in possession.
Well, what I've seen, Judge, also is ghost guns, where now with 3D printers, they're making guns that don't need serial numbers. So they can maybe trace parts of the gun and maybe prints, but if they don't leave prints, they can see, they can trace where some of the parts of the gun were bought, and then the 3D printer makes like the magazine or something else. I was watching this. This is the new frontier.
Well, and actually, that brings up some interesting things, because one of the things to get federal jurisdiction was that the gun had traveled in interstate commerce. Now, maybe you could state that the materials used to print the gun traveled in interstate commerce, but you'd have to prove that, right? So you'd have to know where the materials were procured. Maybe they didn't travel in interstate commerce. Maybe they were manufactured in the state of Texas, which is not to say that wouldn't possibly be a state violation. But to invoke federal, you need interstate commerce, meaning what we would do is we'd have a case, and you'd have an expert from ATF, and they'd say, well, this gun was manufactured in the state of Connecticut. So therefore, since we're in Texas, it obviously traveled in interstate commerce, so we have federal jurisdiction, you see. It gets a little bit trickier if you're in Connecticut and the gun was manufactured in Connecticut.
I understand. So when we're looking at the guns, the new frontier, the gangs, they're not going to apply for guns. So that's the argument NRA has, and I don't think we're going to reconcile this during this recording. But people that are lawful gun owners, they're saying, well, the felons are going to still do it, and now they can make parts of a gun through a 3D printer, which is very dangerous and concerning.
But that's just sort of like saying, well, the speeders are going to speed, so let's not have speed limits anywhere.
Okay.
I mean, maybe the felons aren't going to be, maybe the gang members aren't, but if they've got a felony conviction, then we can take dangerous people off the streets. If they're law-abiding gun owners, then they should be able to have their firearms.
And let's talk about the Castle Law and all that, eliminating the harm. Yeah. How do you feel on that? I mean,
I think largely that has probably existed in Texas based upon the trials that I have seen long before it was codified. I mean, generally, the cases that I've seen in 30 years of practice is when you break into somebody's house, they're allowed to use your firearm and defend themselves. And I think that that's how the juries feel, at least in this area. Anyway.
Yeah, I think in Texas the culture is, that you have to stand your ground.
Yeah, they've codified something that I think has been what the general public in this area feels. And
if you've kept up with the legislation, I'm sure you have, but affecting you particularly, is there anything new on the horizon that we need to be aware of that might be in your court that ordinarily hasn't been after this latest legislature?
Nothing really drastic. No, nothing really drastic.
Okay. Well, I want to, take this. We rarely have judges come out, and so district judges handle everything from felonies, general felonies, garden variety, to death cases?
Well,
civil, wrongful death?
here locally, we handle our jurisdiction, the district courts, as felonies, just like you said. We handle family law, divorces, child custody.
I feel for you.
So that's a big part of our practice. Protective orders, that's become a big part of our practice. We handle civil cases. I've been assigned a couple of election contests. We do a lot of the property cases,
Walk us through a little bit when you get up in the morning, brush your teeth, head out to the court. Walk us through a typical day.
Well, I can tell you what happened today. I got to the courthouse, and I had a lot of criminal cases, arraignments. I had a bond reduction hearing on a homicide case. We had a protective order. That was this morning. This afternoon, I have a case in which a lawyer's trying to domesticate a foreign civil judgment. So we do a lot of different things. I mean, those are three completely different things.
It's a heavy docket, in other words. You guys.
Well, I mean, at first, everyone has their bailiwick, right? When they become a judge, maybe it's criminal, maybe it's family, maybe it's civil, maybe it's probate, whatever it may be. And when you sit on the bench, is to that area you're very comfortable, right? But knowing all these different types of law it takes a while. I'd say it takes about a full term to be a really good, competent district judge with general jurisdiction. Some bigger cities, they have specialization, so probably wouldn't take that long if that happens to be your bailiwick. They split it up generally: family, criminal, and civil. So if it's your area of practice and you've been practicing for some years, you're pretty competent. But we have to know a whole lot of stuff.
Agreed. Mm-hmm. We've got a minute left. This interview has flown by, but is there anything you would like to talk about or discuss, or just any message like jury duty or anything else?
Well, let's talk a little bit about jury duty. We have gone over the last few years, and of course COVID kind of rocketed us in this direction. We've gone online, and this is, I think the general public really likes this, right? So you still get your notice in the mail, and then you can register, and then you come straight to the courtroom. There's no more cattle call like in the old days down on the first floor. We don't do that anymore. The jurors come directly to the courtroom, and what's great about this is that if we settle the case the day before, you get a text on your phone. We don't need you anymore, so you never show up to the courthouse for nothing.
Well, that's great. Matt, I appreciate that. And a lot of people don't want to be in a jury because, they're afraid of losing their job and stuff. And people say, you're not going to lose your job. I've had jurors tell me, they come on employment law cases and say they found another way to get rid of me. Like if they're on an OJ case, for 2 years or something. But yeah,
we haven't seen a whole lot of that. But they could, they're not legally. They're not supposed to give you a hard time.
All right. Well, you've been listening to Judge and watching Judge Bobby Galvan, 94th District Court here in Nueces County. We've talked about federal and state law. I've really enjoyed having you on.
Well, finally, thanks for having me.
After all these years, yeah. But thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
All right.
All right. We run out of time, and we want to thank our sponsors again: Vasquez Flores Home Health, 881-9922, and Lopez Broadcasting. And also, we want to thank everybody out there who watches our program. Thank you, and God bless.